if it wasn't for the fact that I was paying too much tax, it worked out that so after 6 years, I'd overpaid by £6,000, and that money basically went into my first studio equipment.
Welcome to A Musical Mind. I'm your host, Richard Raymond II. I'm a recording engineer, music producer, and multi-instrumentalist located in Colorado Springs, Colorado. In this podcast, we'll talk to a variety of musicians about the music-making process, as well as the life and mindset that have helped them find success as a musical mind. Thank you for being here. Here we go.
Hey there, welcome to another episode of A Musical Mind. This is your host, Richard Raymond II.
Today's guest is Mark Nell, the electrical engineer who moonlights as the owner of 5-Pin Media, the British-based sample pack label that I have done some work with. Today's chat is pretty cool. We talk about a variety of different stuff, including how Mark got into sound design, what inspired him to start his own sample pack label, and what was that process like, as well as our take on bands or artists remaining relevant long into their careers, or if that's even a possible thing that people can do. So, lots packed into this episode. Here you go. Here's my conversation with Mark Nell from 5-Pin Media. Hello, everyone. Today I'm here with the South African native currently residing in Eastbourne, United Kingdom, Mark Nell. How are you doing, Mark?
I'm doing great, thanks, Rick.
Did I nail that description?
Pretty much
Okay.
on the nose.
All right. I was just saying that he could feel free to swear throughout this if he was feeling motivated to do so. And I said I bet everyone would enjoy hearing a British person cuss, and he's like, "Well, I technically don't qualify as a British person, so I had to make sure I got that intro on the nose." Mark, so a lot of my guests thus far have been like from this kind of tight-knit community that I have. So how about you tell us a little bit about yourself and what you do musically and otherwise?
Okay, yeah. I mean, I guess thinking where to start, because it's not a straightforward answer, really. If you can think of it in terms of an answer, I have a bit of a sort of split personality in my professional world. In that, on one hand, I'm a sound designer, and founder of 5-Pin Media, which is a sample company. And then on the other hand, I'm also a manufacturing engineer with an electronics background. Uh, that's what I trained professionally to do when I left school. Um, so, and at the moment, both professions occupy my time in my life, which is obviously keeps me very busy. Get little sleep, not enough. Um, but at the same time, it's very rewarding because I can, you sort of get fed up with one thing, and then you can flip to the other thing, get fed up with that, sort of on a daily basis. Because my normal sort of 9 to 5 hours is engineering, and then the less how can you put it, sort of less hospitable hours are spent doing sound design, like most people who do music,
Sure.
way too late into the night.
Yeah. So for those who don't know, I during the pandemic, I started sending out some emails of music loops and some samples, or maybe it was just loops, to various labels. I kind of just found a list of them, I think on the Loopmasters website, which 5-Pin Media, you have a contract with Loopmasters, correct? And so
Right.
I just kind of was sending out cold emails, and I think I got quite a few replies, but most of them were, just not interested or whatever. And you were kind of like, more or less, like, when can you start type of thing. So how about you? Do you remember when you got that email, and do you remember, like why, what you heard, and what made you think I'd be a good fit? Because I'm definitely different than anyone else you'd worked with prior to that. So if you could expand on that.
Well, actually, firstly, uh, I think you sort of your statement there that you were different. That's most probably one of the reasons, because I'm normally looking for somebody who brings something different to the table, and also something that can challenge me musically. So something that was slightly outside of my comfort zone in terms of the sample business, not in terms of my own personal taste, but in terms of what we traditionally did in terms of sample products. Um, yeah, I remember the email, and there were various links, and I, um, I mean, occasionally get emails. People most probably think I get inundated by people wanting to do samples, and actually, it's not so much the case. You, there was a sort of spate of people that would contact us, um, but generally, maybe a couple a week on average, and I always go through and click on the links, have a listen to the demos, have a listen to any other work that they're referencing, any tracks they may have released on Spotify. Um, and I clicked on yours, and immediately I was intrigued. I was interested. Here was somebody who clearly a drummer, I could tell, and from your words, and then also had guitar skills. Um, Seemed to be also pretty adept with the keys. Um, so yeah, I just thought, wow, this is an all round person here. Um, and yeah, it could be interesting working with him, which I'm glad to say it has always been interesting.
Wow. That's cool to hear. I think especially now, as I don't feel, I still play as much as I can, but it just at that point in time that was like the center focus of my life. So it's refreshing to be reminded that I do all three of those things pretty well, even though I don't. I go kind of now. It's like a one at a time phase. I haven't played drums in probably a month, but I played a lot of guitar. Whereas that was kind of everything was firing on all cylinders. But yeah, so that exchange wound up with me doing our first sample pack together, which was psychedelic soul and down tempo. If you're an avid listener of the show at this point, you've probably heard a number of ads for the three sample packs. It wound up being three before I kind of got a bit burnt out, and my life looks a lot different now. Um, we hope to do some more work together. But anyway, so there was psychedelic soul and down tempo, and then there was laid back and groovy, and then laid back and groovy guitars, and then I was working on laid back and groovy keys, and that was kind of where we
Hit
took an
the
indefinite
hit the
pause.
pause button on the keys.
Yeah,
The keys are
it
sort of sitting
was
in pause mode.
it was required. I still have the files. Maybe I'll unearth it someday, but it just had to happen at that point in time. But anyway, so I would wager that a lot of people here are familiar with loops from whatever DAW they use, but they may not have purchased a sample pack, because I think most listeners of this show are probably more like players than, in bands, more so than they are producers, until I start picking up a wider audience. But those are the people I've surrounded myself with, because that was kind of who I was until I became more of a producer, shifted names, did the whole thing. So anyway, how about we talk a bit about what is inside the psychedelic soul and down tempo pack, and how that may be similar or different to what Five Pin Media typically puts out.
Well, firstly, it falls into the category of one of our what I would call uh, larger collections, and it encompasses all the different formats. So you got most sample packs traditionally have loops, one shots. Most people know them for the audio. Um, from the get go, with FIPA Media, we aim to include MIDI as a uh, not the most important component, but it's there to work, in tandem with the loops, and especially one shots, and then also multi samples. So in the case of psychedelic soul, they had the multi samples, you had the MIDI, the loops, the one shots, and then also it covered all the popular formats. So Halion for Cubase, Logic, so EXS sampler, Ableton sampler, and then amongst others. So NNXT for Reason, Propeller Heads. Well, it was Propeller Heads Reason. It's now called Reason Studios. They've moved along. So yes, it really covered all those bases. Sometimes that's a lot of extra work that goes into it. And it doesn't necessarily mean that we can actually retail it for any more money, but that's not the point. So the point I always find with that sort of pack is to give it longevity, and by including all these formats and making it as appealing as possible across the board, um, you find that people will be able to use it year after year, and through that, I hope people will then come back to the label when they're looking for something new, rather than just I call it, some of the other packs that don't, without being unkind, they are really just more disposable. The ones that are just the flavor of the day is have some loops, have some one shots, and they whatever the current trend is. For me, really, a sample pack shouldn't be about that. It should go a lot deeper, and it should be something that at any one given time provides uh, a certain bit of inspiration, and then if you came back to it 3 years later, you find something else. So
Totally. So we were talking about years and things here. So when did the company get started and when did you put out your first pack? I think I remember loosely what the first pack was, but how did you wind up doing all of this? And I know it's been a number of years. So what's that been like? And how has the industry changed along the way? I realize that's a bundle of questions there, but I think I can cue
yeah,
you in if you need a refresher midway through.
um, yeah. No, I mean the industry on a whole is. We started out, released our first packs in February of 2010. So literally, we actually formally formed the company in the fall of 2009. Um, so just to give some backdrop, I was kind of disillusioned with my engineering job at the time, and I was really just, how can I put it? I had all these ideas that were really like bursting. They wanted to get out, and I had an opportunity. I took a voluntary redundancy because it was a global company I was working for, and they were downscaling because there was a major downturn in the industry. And I thought, well, right, I need to. It's now or never. I must use this opportunity to my advantage. And I grabbed it, and then you sort of a little bit into it. I thought, what the hell am I doing? I
Mhm.
must be insane.
Yeah.
but one thing I do know about myself is I am, how can I put it? Sort of a determined and persistent person. So I wasn't going to give up. I wasn't going to turn back. Um, so yes, in the fall of 2009, formed the company. I didn't know a hell of a lot. I used samples. I knew what I didn't like, and I knew what I wanted to try and do. I didn't have all the technical skills, the studio chops, so to speak, to actually execute it. But I enrolled, did some courses, did some online courses in between while I was um, producing the first products. And so in February, the first released 2 packs that came out, Minimal Tech Volume 1 and Classic House Pianos. Both products are still on sale on Loop Masters, who are our main distributor. So when I say they're on sale, so they're in the shop windows. So in other words, they haven't been relegated to the archives, which is testament. So 13 years later, there's still reasonable sales on
Wow,
those first 2 products, such that they remain on the shelf, so to speak.
that's
Um,
amazing.
and just to answer your last question, I do remember the industry in that time frame, 13 years, it has changed quite radically. I mean, when we first started out, there were just a handful of labels on Loop Masters. Loop Masters itself, literally, they operated out of a garage, so to speak, was
Wow.
literally a converted garage. I knew founder Matt Pelling, production manager Paul Willard, um, uh, and various other people that worked there. And literally, you could count them on one hand.
Wow.
Um, and now Loop Masters are one of the big 3, I guess it is, if you think about it. They are now actually owned by Beatport. So you have Loop Masters, the original, standalone site, selling a traditional pack, and then you also have Loop Cloud, which is their cloud-based subscription model, which is hosted on Beatport Sounds. So yes, it's definitely come a long way.
That is so cool though that I mean, given just for it to last that long and still be on the storefront, like, how many packs have been made between then and now? I think that just speaks volumes about, um I think anyone could kind of make a pack, but there's no way that I would have been able to include all the things you were listing off previously, like the multi-samples and all that sort of stuff, which I was unfamiliar with, without, like, your knowledge. So it's super cool that from the jump, you were able to kinda know what people wanted. So, I guess that kind of segues into, the next question here. Like, you had said you used packs yourself, you knew what you liked, you knew what you didn't like. So, in what context were you using them? Um, when did you start using them? Like, when did you've been around probably when these things first became a thing. Like, I got my first family computer and there were thousands of loops in it. So, it's unique to be able to talk to someone who's been able to kind of see it all happen and have the technical wherewithal to, like, understand what's happening.
Yeah, I mean, I'm to give my age. I mean, I'm 57 now, but this is the interesting part. I actually only got involved in um, what do you want to call it, music tech, studio gear, etc. In the early 2000s. Um, After emigrating to the UK from South Africa, from a young age, I was always interested in music recordings, collecting um, vinyl. Uh, Spent most of my money on music and hi-fi equipment. I was like into hi-fi and that. And yeah, a wide range of music. Thanks to my brothers. I mean, when I was 7 years old, I was listening to Led Zeppelin and Uriah Heep and
Yeah.
a host of rock and all that, some sort of heavy stuff, and then later on Black Sabbath. So um, yeah, and I think I must mention one of the records I think that most probably influenced me and most probably subconsciously, that was most probably the seed. Uh, when it came to like wanting to get involved in sound design and sound in general was Pink Floyd's Animals.
Really?
Because I remember as a kid listening to this it was late 70s. I mean, the album had already been out for quite a while before I discovered it. But it was pre 1980s, and I was listening to it and all these like sounds and things, and you had all the sheep and the dogs and
Yeah.
the uh, um, pig sounds, and you also had all these other little sounds in there, like were generated by, I could hear it wasn't a guitar, because you traditionally we're all used to guitar music, we're just hearing drums and things that go through guitar pedals, etc. And you're sort of listening and you think, well, what is that? What is that? Some of them were just small sounds that were coming in and out and bouncing off the left and right. And I was just sort of mesmerized by this album. I just and to this day, I mean, obviously it's one of my prized albums in my collection, and I always if I listen to it, then I think of that, and how it's the part that is wonderful is you sit there, you're listening to it, you're immersed in it, and you sort of asking yourself, I wonder how they did that. But it's also great not knowing,
Yeah.
because it carries this mystique, this mystery.
Exactly, and once you start knowing, it loses its charm, and I've had
Yeah,
that
yeah.
happen
It's
a
like
number of times.
it peels a little bit away. It takes that
Yeah.
magic away. But yeah, so yes, it was. And then in terms of actually, acquiring, using samples early on, I sort of got myself a modest setup. Um, it was another interesting story. I was on the wrong tax code from when I first arrived and started my engineering job, and I hadn't realized it. So if it wasn't for the fact that I was paying too much tax, it worked out that so after 6 years, I not quite 6 years, it was about 5 years. I think I'd overpaid by £6,000. So I had
Nice.
this tax rebate, and that money basically went into my first studio equipment. And of
That's
course, that
amazing.
buys you some decent studio gear.
Yeah,
Uh,
especially yeah, that's
so,
amazing.
I think my first monitors were Events, the small company. It's American company Event. Um, they're famous for their Opal monitors, which are very good, high end. But these were just little Events. I can't remember what the specific model was. And I had an Emu. Um, I bought an Emu interface, audio interface. It had MIDI. Was one of the sort of card based. You had the PCI cards before PCI Express. So PCI cards, I installed them myself and had the docking station, everything. It worked pretty well, and it came with a soft sampler as well. And back in those days with the Emu, the only way you could enable the soft sampler is if you bought the hardware. So it was sort of tied in with the hardware. Same principle with early Digi products, which eventually became Avid. So yeah, that was the beginnings, and I was just grabbing loops, and I'd met Paul through the crowd that we hung out with, the sort of Eastbourne Brighton crowd, and we'd go partying together, go see live music, going to clubs, and that sort of was where I started using samples. He said, "Oh, try this." He had those are the days when they were distributed via CD.
Mhm.
So, there was no online digital download. It
Sure.
was, if you wanted to buy a sample pack, you basically ordered the CD.
Interesting.
um, I think, and I'm trying to think, how did you do it? Because of course there was no sort of real online portal. Um, yeah, I'm not too sure how we even paid for it in those
So,
days.
how would that be formatted? Was it just kind of like loop and then space and then loop, and you had to just, like, rip the audio? Because you can't, like
Yeah, the
or can you
formatting wasn't different
download?
to any different to these days. I mean, it was just
Oh,
basically a series of folders that had been zipped, and then so it was loaded as data on the disk. It wasn't
okay.
done audio. Interestingly, I have got one very early samples, Loop Masters. I think it's called Tech Breaks, where there is actually an audio disc, like as you imagine. So you could put this in and it would just play loop after loop. Like you could sit there if you want to do something mind numbing
Sure.
on a Saturday evening and it's sort of like load a sample CD and listen to one loop after the other.
That's hilarious. Yeah,
It
no, it
was
just shows how foreign all that is to me. Like, I'm vaguely can remember getting like a CD that I wanted to then put on my um like iPod, and it would just kind of come out like a zip folder. But that's so like distant in my memory that I'm like, how would that even be done? But that's funny.
well, at least it wasn't what's it on 4-track tape or something. Can you imagine?
No, I can't. Pausing the show here to talk about my first sample pack with 5-pin media titled Psychedelic Soul and Downtempo, available on loopmasters.com. This thing is massive. It is 5.8 gigabytes, and it took me forever working on this thing to give you all the sweet stuff that's packed in here. And as it currently stands, it has 16 5-star ratings on loopmasters.com, which is pretty good. Anyway, there's a lot packed in here, recorded with primarily analog instruments, including my Korg SV1, a Roland Strings, a Wurlitzer organ, my Micro Brute, my Glockenspiel, my Fender Rascal bass, a Washburn semi-hollow bass, Fender Strat, and an array of analog effects and pedals. There are 100 acoustic drum loops on here that I played and recorded myself at Wholesome Studio C7 in Chicago's North Side back when I still lived there. And there are 502 drum loops in total, meaning the rest of those are programmed. There's so many drums in here. We also have one-shots. We've got musical loops on all those instruments that I named. To be specific, there's 766 loops, 179 one-shots, 981 multi-samples, 18 sampler patches, 240 MIDI files, and a Live 10 project featuring 25 sampler bass instrument racks. Like I said, this thing is huge. There's so much to use in here if you're a producer, beat maker, or you just need stuff to play along with. I put a lot of work into this thing. I promise there's plenty here for you to use. Sounds great. It's vibey. It's all down tempo, cool shit. Give it a listen. Give it a buy. Head on over to Loop Masters. I got the link in the show notes. Go there, go get it, and start making some cool shit. So, can we get some dates here? Like I know you had definitely spent a lot of time like seeing live electronic music. And this would have been like as it's kind of happening for the first time, right? So, um, like what are some groups and or clubs and like around what time? If we could get some years here, just for most of our listeners are probably going to be born in the 90s. So,
So yeah, sure. Well, I mean, actually have to go back to before I moved to the UK. As I say, well, coming from apartheid South Africa, we were uh, deprived of international artists. Seeing bands from overseas. I mean, the having said that, there were some really good local artists in my hometown. Friends were involved in bands. It was a sort of punk era, do it yourself, of the early '80s. So I'd always been around bands, and we always had a local scene. So I used to see a lot of local music, and then even some of the sort of bigger South African acts. One band in particular who really had an influence on me was a band called the Asylum Kids. um, they only released one full album and one EP in their time before they disbanded, and the various members, and they went out to form other bands that I sort of followed. Actually got to know the drummer, met him personally. Because one of his other in the next band he was in was the guy was also from my hometown. So yeah, I think his name, the drummer was Steve Howells, if I remember correctly. So yeah, I was always just found myself moving around musicians then, but I never played anything. I never
Mhm.
learned to play an instrument. Yeah, I just enjoyed listening to music and ended up hanging out with bands. And then in terms of actual, how can I put it? I think the main turning point came, it was circa 1994. There was I mean, things were opening up in South Africa. So we're talking post apartheid. Um, there was Massive Attack were playing at the Village Green in Durban in Natal. So it was Massive Attack, who are from Bristol. There was, believe it or not, Uriah Heep.
Really?
Yeah, I mean,
Wow.
what a sort of strange lineup, be Massive Attack, then
What
Uriah
the
Heep,
hell?
and
Yeah.
then I think that same gig was also, it was Skunk and Nancy, because it was that era of, Skunk and Nancy had first come out, but it was watching Massive Attack. I was just completely blown away because all of a sudden now I'd always just listened to, it was either industrial. I'd always been into electronic music, but in that era, I was, in the late '80s, I was listening to a lot of Pixies, and yeah, I mean, Pixies was sort of the main band. Then grunge bands like Mudhoney, Nirvana,
I wanna
you know,
interject real quick, um,
yeah,
because I just saw, a car the other day. And I live in Colorado Springs, which has a lot of Christians, and, I saw an old SUV that had definitely done lots of off-roading, and they had a Pixies bumper sticker, and it said, "Where is my mind?" and had, like, a mushroom, so you're like, "Okay, cool, like, yeah, I get it, you like your mushrooms, haha, Colorado, fun stuff," and then underneath it, it says, "Do you follow Jesus this closely?" And I'm just that's the type of people that are out here, just this, like, funny blend of, like, trippers who are, like, sleep with their Bibles, but it's just kind of funny. You made me think of that because that was probably just like yesterday that I saw that Pixies thing. Anyway, take it back
well,
from
I was
where
just
you
going to
were.
say, well, that's a really interesting sort of dichotomy. That
It's common
that
here. It is. I wanted
that
people
that
to
that would
know.
just, I don't know, that would sort of, I don't know if my mind could kind of like deal with that.
Where is your mind, you know? Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, I mean, it'd be an understatement. Obviously, I saw the Pixies. I saw them, the full band here, Troxy's. I can't remember now. It was before 2010. The exact year eludes me, but yeah, and that was just a major highlight to see the original Pixies with Kim Deal on bass.
that's amazing.
So yeah, um, but yeah, it's just it's a bit sad because I'm not saying that you know they just, I think a band has a sort of, they run a certain a period where they are, how can you put it,
In
I want
their
to use the word
prime?
productive, but just where they artistically, they're on the money,
Yeah,
but it like in an effortless way. And I just find some of the
totally.
more recent albums just seem, it feels like, when you feel that they're trying too hard, and or
Yeah.
just, I can't, it doesn't really, it didn't really get through to me. So yeah, it's a bit of a pity, but I'll just remember them for all the classic works. So
Yeah, that's such a I don't know what's gonna happen. That's so common with lots of bands who wind up staying together, through their prime success.
that's it. The word prime is what I was looking
Yeah,
for.
but it's just there's very few groups that I can think of. A group, maybe individuals who someone like Damon Albarn comes to mind who, he was doing it with Blur and that was kind of hot at the time. But you go listening to something like I think it was his most recent solo album, the Everyday Robots, and you wouldn't even know it's the same person. But But if you go hear the most recent Blur album, like, there's a lot of differences there too, but still a little bit easier to trace that back. But I'm just thinking of groups like Weezer or, yeah, like the Pixies. Like, if I hear a new Pixies song, which I think maybe I listened to like 30 seconds of one that came out within the past couple of years, and I'm immediately just like, no thanks. Like, I don't want to hear this right now. But I go back and hear those original records, and there's something to them. So I don't know if that's something cosmic where like people have their time and then it's not their time, or it's just another random group, Third Eye Blind. I actually love some of the Third Eye Blind records because I heard them when I was in a formative age. They were like albums that my sister gave me. And now, like, they're still out playing, still like the same brand, same vibe, same everything, but everyone's just like old now. And I'm just like, that stuff is so repulsive. And like, I don't know that I would do anything different if you're in this thing, you have this machine, and you know if you put in X, you're gonna get out Y. Like, if it ain't broken, don't fix it. But it's so hard, it seems, for people to like maintain like relative creativity, if that makes any sense. Or relevant creativity. What do I mean? Not relative. I mean like
Yeah,
relevant,
relevant,
relevant.
relevant. Yeah, yeah, totally agree. And of course, it's this. How can I put it? I mean, it's wrong to expect a band to stay in one place, always produce exactly the same, because that to me, I mean, yeah, a band, as people get older, they change. So a band should change and they should grow. But how can I put it? I mean, a good example is Radiohead.
Mhm.
Everybody, everybody knows Radiohead. There were some people that were absolutely. I think it was when Kid A came out.
Yep.
Um, they were. How can I put it? It
2001.
yeah, they they were sort of like, what's going on? They were embracing experimentalism. There was electronic in it, and of course, that's an area that, for me, I didn't find it strange at all.
Sure.
And it seemed to fit, their way of working, and uh, I really enjoyed both the old Radiohead and this new Radiohead, but yet there were some purists who were just, you know, it's that purist thing, like, how dare they?
Yeah.
It's sort of, they, what right do they have, kind of thing. Well, they
Right.
have every right,
Yeah,
actually.
exactly.
It's their choice. But
Yeah.
yeah, there were people that were appalled, and hopefully, I like to think that a lot of people came around, eventually, and sort of got it and understood. But at the time, I can remember it was like it was a sort of revolt, and
Yeah.
I've seen it happen to quite a few bands where people like wanted to sound exactly the same, and that's not good. But at the same time, then, um, I guess what I've seen bands who just seem to have like lost the plot. They just, uh, yeah, I mean, another favorite of mine from the 90s was, well, still is Smashing Pumpkins.
Mhm.
And some of the recent work, I just don't quite, it's very self-indulgent. It's very
I can't
kind of,
even put it on. Yeah.
it's,
And that
and I
was
mean, they were brilliant,
right.
in their day. They just had this certain energy in the sound without having to, they didn't have to, how can I put it, let rip like Nirvana, like could, but yet it was always there. It was this like angry, it's sort of like
Yep.
bubbling cauldron.
That was my first favorite band, probably prompted by my sister who was so when she was 16, kind of at the peak of the Smashing Pumpkins, I would have been 4, and, like, I can remember, her, like, being like, "Ricky, what's your favorite band?" Me being like, "Smashing Pumpkins." But it's just funny because I just listen to totally different music now, but I don't wanna glaze over the Radiohead thing because I have some thoughts there. Throughout high school, they would have absolutely been one of my favorite bands. I had a Radiohead phone case, and that was like a big deal to me. And they were a group, like first time I heard Kid A, that was very weird for me. And that was what I was like magnetized to, particularly during high school, kind of before I started playing. I wanted things that were experimental and that, like, were weird. For whatever reason, that was what I was glued to. So, another group we've talked about a handful of times is Animal Collective, and these are groups that did start out with guitars and then got tired of it and started, using synthesizers, samplers, kind of like making they have great songwriting tools, but they're using all sorts of different, techniques to build the song. But anyway, so Radiohead was one of those groups, that like, the first time I heard Tame Impala would be another example where I hear something and I feel that it was made for me at that moment in time. And so I now move on to college. I think my senior year may have been when A Moon-Shaped Pool came out, and it had been, at that point in time, like, probably 3 or 4 years since I had been kind of, like, knocked off my axis, and I had that expectation or that, desire from this record, and at that point, you know, um I had started playing, I had made a couple records on my own, and I had heard every Radiohead song at least 20 times or whatever. So this record comes out, me and my friend get properly stoned in our college basement, and, I was kind of underwhelmed. I've come to like
Yeah.
that record, but I even though I hadn't heard it before, it felt like I knew what was coming. I've caught on to a lot of trends in their writing as I've tried to write many songs like them. Like they have a strong tendency to have this big, chaotic, like close where just things just build, 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 boosh, choo, and then suck all the air out. And I noticed that happening like throughout the album where I'm like, oh, this is another Radiohead song. I haven't heard this song, but I've heard this
Yeah.
format or whatever, even if the instrumentation's a little bit different, and Tom's singing a little bit differently. And I was, like, so bummed afterwards because I had, like I was like, "Finally, I'm gonna get fucking, like, rocked again, and I'm gonna be, like, motivated," and it just didn't do that. And so even a group like Radiohead, who we're gonna bring up as a band that has been able to evolve throughout their career, even for me, there's still something left to be desired there, and I don't really think anyone is up to that task, Like, I
Yeah.
don't think it's fair to place that on someone, and that's okay. That's okay.
Yeah, no, and it is okay. I mean, I think, well, I suppose there's a lesson learned there as well for all of us. Everybody, and you most probably find if you spoke to Tom York himself and you asked him which were his favorites, it must probably be, you'd be surprised to what he personally liked. And often that is the case for someone in a band. Or if you have a band and you ask them, okay, so what music do you enjoy, or what's your favorite? And it can be very surprising.
Totally.
It's yeah, we all sort of, yeah, it's and I guess that's one of the beauties about just music in general, um, is it's, that unpredictability, um, and you just sort of, you got to sometimes just take it at face value, um, not uh, don't have any preconceived notions about something. But like in the case of A Moon-Shaped Pool, what destroyed it for you most probably partly was you had some preconception as to what you were going to hear or what you wanted to hear,
It's the feeling
and
that
then
I
it
wanted.
failed to live up to your expectation.
I wanted that feeling of hearing something made for me at that point in my life, which I've felt only a handful of times, and I'm not sure if I'll feel that again. There's a part of me that wonders if, like, only someone in their adolescence can experience that because they're just there's so much that they haven't seen or so much that they haven't heard. You said you heard Kid A and it wasn't weird or surprising to you. Like that I was like, "What the hell am I listening to? This is amazing." You know? And maybe that's only because I was 16 or whatever the first time I heard it. So I think it's like that youthful, uh, awe, I guess, is like what I want to feel. And now I just don't expect that from
Well,
anything.
that's the thing. Yeah, as one gets older, it gets harder and harder to enjoy that, that discovery.
That's a
I
good
guess it
word.
is. It's that innocence, that discovery, with it, and obviously it extends beyond music. But that is, sort of, and you will never recreate it. So enjoy it, or enjoy the memory. But
Right.
it's and funny, that is precisely when I'm actually creating, you know, creating demos, or creating sounds, patches, etc. Pack that I recently did in Ableton. Um, it's sort of, you want to get that wow thing all the time, but sometimes, you yourself, it's very hard when it's your own creation. Um, it is important that you feel something, but sometimes you have to leave it, come back to it later, and then you sort of like go, actually, I wasn't being fair. You couldn't. I think what your own material, your own creations, that's one of the most difficult to sort of judge. I don't know how you feel if you're creating music. Um, if you're overcritical of your own music, and you always feel, well, that's not good enough, or I should redo it, or if you accept the mistakes and just take it at face value.
Um, I think I've gotten better at just accepting it. Um, and I think I'm working on a record right now, and yeah, I think like me a couple years ago wouldn't think it was enough, but it's truly, with the way my life is structured right now, it feels like that's all that I have to give. Um, and I think I have enough wherewithal to recognize that even me giving my all right now, even though it may feel like my all previously like had more depth or width or whatever you want to call it, I don't know that like it's not going to be objectively received as something with less depth or width or whatever it may be. It's a bit more simple for me, and not necessarily the arrangements, but like the layering and the way I've worked on it and the amount of time I've been able to put into it. But it might be preferred by some people. So I'm just trying to release control and just do what I can, opposed to like feeling like whatever I'm capable of when I don't have the time that I used to is insufficient or that no one would want to hear it. Um, did I answer your question?
Yeah, yeah, yeah. No, no, yeah. Because I mean that's the thing. Often, when, and again, going right back to one of your earlier questions, when you're first starting out making music, and that, one of the hardest things is you're sort of very proud of, your creation. You've done this thing. You think, wow, because in your world, in your head, and in your mind, you think, you've come up with this amazing, you kind of like, the beat is right, and you've focused, you got this bass, and you think is wonderful. And of course, if you then give it to someone who's say more professional, and then they kind of listen to it, um, and I still have recordings of some of my first attempts at music, and I've listened to them, more than a decade on, and I can see the ideas, and the great ideas, but also obviously I can, it's glaring, the lack of ability, the poor mixing, the
Mhm,
bad uh, balance of elements,
mhm,
all the things that come with experience, and just basically hard work. Nobody's, I, I certainly don't think some people are better at it and they get it quicker, but I don't think there's any short, fast, you know, route to being successful, or a good mixer. And again, I'm not. I prefer. I'm better in the sound design sort of area of music. So when it
mhm.
comes to creating patches, creating sounds, um, drum loops, etc., rather than the overall composition and mix. But yeah, it's how can I put it? It's sort of having the naivety is a good thing, because when you, like I said, listen back to early recording and you can hear that you're very naive at the time, but you can just see how the ideas flow, and you sometimes
Yep.
think, "Wow, I wish I had all those ideas."
Yep.
With what you know now, it's sort of weird. It's almost like you forfeit one to gain the other. Uh,
Yeah. Yeah.
it's an odd thing.
It is. And at least for me, you do forfeit one to get the other, and I think I've said this on the show before. What I can do with a small amount of time now would have taken me days, previously. And so when I think back to, like, my first record I did as Lime Forest, that was like I was learning how to play the instruments. I would do pass after pass after pass after pass just to, like, get the part out. Like, I don't know how, aside from, like, the rhythm guitar, I'm not sure that I would have been able to play the song through. Like, I did not even have that musical proficiency. Um, and so that took me a whole summer of working on that pretty much every day, and then all of the mixing was GarageBand presets. So I would find, it was like drums 4, and it's like would automatically apply, some compression, some EQ, the whole 9 to, like, get it laid in. And yeah, all presets on everything. For vocals, I did have, like, a vocal pedal that I ran through as well. Um, and then even with mastering, there was a mastering preset. And that record, if I put it on, I'm not one bit bothered by anything from the mix or anything like that. And the ideas are so clear to me. And there's a charm to that record. Uh, but yeah, now, like, I'll work in, like, sometimes I'll get 15 minutes, and I'll get the whole song tracked. I'll do 3 takes, probably wind up just using 1 full take for 90% of it. Um, and then I won't be able to get back to it for 3 months sometimes. And that's just, like, the way that it works now. So I don't know that, I don't think I wouldn't wanna go back, but there's certainly, it I couldn't even if I wanted to. Even if I had that same time, there's no way I would work in the same way. It's just gone. In the same way that that band's prime is, it's just there and it's captured and then it's gone. You have to let it go and accept it for what it is now. It's like the same type of thing.
Yeah, well, I suppose the important thing is you did capture it. You guys, you took the time, the effort, the labor of love to do it, and for what sort of reward? I mean, obviously you knew at the time it wasn't going to be some sort of chart hitting record or whatever. When you start out on their musical journey, you do it very much. It's something you do for your own gratification, really, and also obviously in the case of a band, a collective. Um, but yeah, I mean, I should. Now this is interesting. So I'm sort of entering a phase where I've decided I need to make time to actually try and output music,
Mhm,
um, because to date it's always just been, how can I put it, uh, more like a sort of sketch pad and various things not finished, because my prime concern is obviously creating and producing sample packs.
mhm,
But more and more, I've listened to a lot of released and produced music and styles I like, and um, yeah, I'm sort of left thinking, this is not great. It's not. I really do need to pull my finger out and actually, the famous saying, I need to create an album. I mean, there was a famous one. I don't know if you know about the DJ Sasha, who's from the 90s. He was sort of used to play alongside Digweed, and he was uh, famous UK DJ, internationally known. And he was always talking about this album he was doing. And I think it took something like, I don't know, 6 years or something
mhm.
just to get his first album out. It was interesting. But I don't want it to be a case of that. I feel the time is right now. So I really want to you know, actually stop producing a full body of music rather than snippets of things for other people, or being, or doing editing of sample packs and formatting the
Right.
stuff that's been done by other people.
Yeah. I want to just touch on this concept that I think about now sometimes that was the focal point of a podcast episode I edited months ago. And so we all know what the North Star is, something that you see it or whatever it may be and you know what you want to do. And then there's this other like the opposite of that is the South Star, and that's like seeing things or someone where you're like, that's exactly what I don't want. But it can almost be as productive with giving you clarity about what you do wanna do, and that's happened to me a lot of times too. That's what happened with, not this podcast in particular, but the one my wife and I do. Like, I'm working on podcasts and and not to say that the quality of them wasn't good, but I was just like, what we can do, like, it needs to be out there, and so I think that's, like, kind of a cool source of inspiration is, like, seeing things where you're like, I have something to add, you know? Um and equally as, effective is seeing something where you're like, "Wow, that's amazing. I wanna make something like that." Um,
Yeah, I mean, and that's the thing. So, still hearing stuff where it ignites, and you kind of that magic we talked about earlier, where you think, "Well, I wonder how they did that," because obviously now, having a lot more studio experience and knowledge, and also, I mean, there's a flip side to that. Of course, you don't um, actually Paul Willard of Loop Masters said this to me once. He said his one warning was, he said, once you um, learn the sort of techniques, technical side of music production, you'll never listen to a song the same again. And I thought, what he means by that? And I know exactly what he means, because it can be really difficult to just switch off and listen to music without analyzing it. I'm sure
mhm.
you do the same. I find you find yourself analyzing too much, which just sort of defeats the whole objective and the point of music. So you got to try and switch off. And I actually find that um, that's why it's so important. I have a good hi-fi setup with all my vinyl in the lounge. I find if I'm in the studio listening to something, because also partly because they studio monitors, I find it difficult to enjoy music in here. I can't just put music on as like sort of as enjoyment. It's the
Mhm.
wrong environment. It, it's also it's the wrong type of speakers. They monitors. They reveal everything that's not right.
Right.
Rather than, so I try and make time to actually just sit back and enjoy music, but without being analytical. You got to try and switch off and go, okay, I'm listening to music. But I mean, I should imagine it'd be interesting to do a survey in people's lives, the proportion of listening to music versus, I don't know, say watching Netflix series or things. Because I'm still in the camp that I listen to far more music than I watch stuff.
Yeah.
So yeah, most of my I'll enjoy certain things. I do enjoy, obviously, certain Netflix series, and then obviously my wife enjoys. So we both enjoy. Luckily, we do have similar taste. But yeah, the rest of the time for me is Saturday night. The perfect Saturday night is having a good dinner, enjoying a few drinks, wine, whatever, and then sort of the music goes on, and then it gets louder and it gets louder and it gets louder. My poor neighbors,
Yeah.
but they're only subjected to it once a week.
Yeah.
Sometimes then the second bottle of wine gets opened, or maybe it's a bottle
Mhm.
of champagne, and maybe it's 3, 4 in the morning.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, totally. I completely agree with the being hard to turn off the analytical brain. I think, one way to do that is with some sort of mind altering substance that can do that, give you a fresh pair of ears. But I also think that that's why Um, over the past couple years here, I've really gravitated towards like ambient music and jazz because to me those are categorically completely different, and I'm not listening to the production or the arrangement even really because they're kind of just like those are things that just have a pulse or either like a mood in the case of ambient music, and in the case of jazz it's all about the rhythm. And I'm not thinking about the writing. There's usually not a voice, so I'm not thinking about the lyrics or whatever, and so for me that's like a completely different listening experience. I'm not sure that I can like just put on like a regular quote unquote pop album and not analyze the shit out of it unless um I'm like, yeah, have taken some sort of substance or something that kind of can give you those young ears again, so to speak. I don't know. That's just my experience.
Yeah, so that's sort of a, I guess that would be true. I Yeah, because I mean, on the subject of just like listening to different types of music and sort of the production, um, you know, I I find that a lot of I don't want to sound like a curmudgeonly old man type thing, having a gripe always, but I guess I just find that a lot of modern production, there are a few things about it that you know, I'll listen to certain styles. It could be, say, a certain club style, and I'm finding that everything kind of, in terms of the mix and the actual, yeah, the mix, the sort of, for example, like an element like the hi hats, they all tend to sound like it's almost like someone's using the same hi hat loop.
Hmm.
There's a lack of character and deviation. I find that too many things now tend to conform to, it's I hate to use the word, but it's like a recipe.
Yeah.
And whether that's just because people are learning a certain production way, to use a certain amount of compression, to have this is the right tonal balance type thing. I just find, and also it's ever since, you know, we've gone away from vinyl. I mean, yeah, I mean, I've mentioned to you before. I mean, most music's produced way too loud.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, and especially in the electronic and dance world. I know in other areas they've like started to learn and reel it back, and because of streaming, if your track is too loud, I mean, they just normalize it. They reduce it back. Spotify's what, minus 14 lufs,
Yep.
so they're just going to turn it down anyway. But most electronic, club dance music, and that, not only just, I'm not talking about EDM, the mainstream. I'm talking about some of the more sort of obscure. There still seems there's this tendency that it's got to be loud. So most of it, if I analyze it, it's hitting like minus 10, even minus 9. You know,
Wow.
it's like, it's a factor of, 5 louder. Um, yeah, it's a pity because really all you need to do is just turn up the volume knob. I tell people, that's what the volume knob's there for, and it
Right.
just preserves. If you look at, Fletcher Munson loudness curves, as the, the fonts increase, so the difference between bass, perceived level of loudness, and your mid and high range, it it uh, it 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 compresses. It's like a natural compression as you turn, and also just normal speakers, by the way they work and their design, they're terribly inefficient. And when you turn them up in a system, they, everything starts to sort of compress.
Yeah.
So you don't need to compress the hell out of the actual recording that you're doing. And for me, I find that frustrating. I just think the norms are still not right. Okay, we turn the level down on something like Spotify, um, but there's a lot of music that's still just being produced way too loud, and it just, yeah, it does something. It kill. Well, obviously it's killing the dynamics, but it's something else. It's almost the depth. It almost, the depth of the music suffers. The the
Yeah.
the, the when you listen to music that's not busy, and that's the other thing, I'm into a lot of minimal music, whether it be um, alternative rock or something. I like minimal styles. Um, I don't like things where, I like bands where often it's a three piece or whatever, because that limits the amount of things you're trying to listen to. Your brain's fighting to hear a lot of stuff. Um, and in electronic music, where it's quite minimalistic, you're drawn into listening to the elements that you sort of, and if you don't if you don't over limit the music, over compress it, it just, you know what I mean? It just breathes so much more. It's like it's got more life and depth to it. But yeah, the loudness wars, I thought they were a thing of the past, but I'm not so sure. I think
Right.
still commercially, there seems to be this, all these, I don't know if it's the record companies or whether it's the actual producers themselves. Yeah. I mean, if you hear most mastering engineers, they all moan that they would, they would prefer to keep it a lot. And they know, believe you me, they know those guys, they are right. But the saying, the customer's the one that's always right. So
Right.
9 times out of 10, they're just doing what they're being told, or what the customer wants. So
Right.
yeah, I think we've still got a long way to go there.
I agree, and I think, another layer to that, character, as you were saying, you said at one point, I think in the beginning of that, you were saying, like, it's almost as if everyone's using the same hi-hat. Did I hear you say that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Because
yeah. It just sounds to my ears. It sounds.
I think one thing that, I've messed around with lately, so I'm in a jazz soul duo, we're called Old 45s, and when we get together, we record every time. We just record whatever we're playing. And I've done a lot of different things. And most recently, what has made it the most exciting is more mics. Even though there's two of us, um, the first thing we did was literally like electronic drums sounding like acoustic drums, me playing them, and then a mic on a guitar cab, and that mic guitar panned one way, sent to a slapback delay, panned hard to the other side, and that was it. And great, still plenty of energy there in the performance and everything. But now, just to walk everyone through what this has evolved into, and I have a point here, but now we'll have drums and I have my electronic kit set up, but literally the only thing I'm using from it is the kick drum. And I have things mounted onto I'll use the electronic stands for acoustic cymbals and a tom and a real snare. And then I have like a kind of like a Glenn John thing going. So one mic kind of over the floor tom and then an overhead mic. And we had done that. And then we had the guitar going straight in, so we were only hearing the guitar in the or the keys, depending on which beat was playing, in the headphones, and so everything in the room was just drums. The most recent thing, we've had the guitar going in the room, um, and, we've had split the guitar signal, so we have bass and guitar. The bass is going into the headphones, that's the only thing that's direct in. So we got the drum mics picking up the guitar in the room, the drums are not as much going into the guitar mics, but now there's this whole array of things going on. And wow, does it open things up when you're listening back because everything's flying all over, being picked up by all these different mics, giving it all this different character. And so what I'm hearing, character, the thing I'm thinking is like, even if you're going to be an electronic producer, something that I think could give you some interesting flavors here is to just use some dang mics, even if it's like a Roland hi hat that you've used on a million songs. Just send it out your monitor, put your mic, crooked on the cone or something, and that immediately is going to give it some weird flavor. You know, throw up some room mics too. That would be my, if I were to make like a pure electronic record, that would be the way I would approach it.
Oh, that's
And rant.
interesting. That's interesting. And actually, I'll definitely take that on board because I completely relate to what you're saying, because that's often why, you often hear people, they'll use the word sterile when you're talking about electronic music. So and it is a challenge in itself. If you're creating electronic music, half the challenge is to create a sort of warmth, but also, you want a feeling of space and position. So it's very important in electronic music. And you mentioned drums in particular, and that's the thing. I'm not a fan of electronic. When I say electronic drums, I'd much prefer hear acoustic kit. I need to clarify that because I need to be careful because they could be taken. I'm a big fan of drum machines, which are electronic, but obviously they have a certain place because they have a certain flavor and a distinct style. So whether it be an 808 or, famous 909 or one of the sort of new like alpha bass Joe Marks drum machine, they all have their own sort of character and distinct flavor, just like different acoustic kits, as you would know. So they all, but one thing you have to do with them is it's all in the processing. One person with a 909 can make it sound entirely different to another producer with a 909. And that's just the thing. It's how you use it, and a lot of it is how you mix and what processing you use on it. Because normally, from hip hop artists through to the best techno artists, they've got it down to a fine art what processing works, and they've found that through trial and error. And also some of these guys, these top guys, they play big clubs, they're playing to people, they know what works on a big rig, big sound system, and what doesn't, what not to do and what you can do, kind of thing. So it comes, and I mean that's an interesting dynamic. There is, you have DJs that are producers, um, yeah, and I'm talking about, I'm not talking about like these big EDM sort of type productions. I'm talking about like the sort of Richie Horton, Plastic Man play these dark basements, and they go into the studio. They're very creative. They're very, adept in the studio, but they get to take whatever they've created before it's even often released. In the days where they would just, cut a dub plate, and they get to take it out, play it, and then see what the crowd reaction is and what works. And very often also they would keep that recording fairly simple because in the case of someone like Richie Horton, his repertoire is part DJing, but part of it is live as well. If you actually watch the guys, it's like he's an octopus and he's got, he's got arms everywhere. I just don't know how he does it. When you watch it, it's like quite mesmerizing because you think, how the hell does he keep it all together? Most people, it would like, they do something wrong and it would completely fall apart.
Right.
Yeah.
That's super cool. I love watching that happen too. Um, it makes me think like I've been talking about how my mixing process has evolved, and I would say probably 75% of the time spent in one of my mixes now is writing automation. Um, that's been what, yeah, that's like, but automating plugins, messing with delays and reverbs in like I'll just do 15-second performances from a given part. I'll seldom like go through the whole song. Every now and again, maybe on like a lead vocal take, I'll just let the whole thing run and automate the reverb. Um, but that's totally different than doing it live and handling, however many tracks he has going at once. But I think that is like that's what gives um that's what gives things life as well. Automation. Um yeah.
Yeah,
Well,
no,
Mark,
no. It's actually interesting that you mentioned that automation because I think that's the thing. Styles, some of the electronic styles, I think, um, you know, the sort of more guitar traditionally based bands could actually learn something from some of the electronic artists because they've really developed some, how can I put it, unique production techniques in the studio where you take something like minimal techno and it relies on very simple, subtle changes to create that tension and release. The use of reverbs to create like a dark atmosphere. Putting reverb on things traditionally like bass or even the kick drum, which usually was taboo, but
Right.
knowing how to do it so that it's effective, but also making it change so it's dynamic. And I mean, it all adds another dimension. It completely, it changes that production. And that's the difference between just something that's bland, and something that's really good. Um, that's the sort of standout is having those techniques. So, yeah, I think, people that can venture and get out of their comfort zone and explore like new styles of music, it can only be of benefit. You know, I don't think it's good to have this sort of vision like, oh well, I only listen to like guitar or whatever. A good producer is one who actually like wants to understand as much as possible, because
Yep.
then you can really take ideas, and then not necessarily use them exactly in the same way, but you can adapt them to a different style of music. um, I think, yeah, it's if you don't limit yourself, it's going to be of huge benefit.
I agree. That's how we come up with something that feels new. You have to combine ingredients from all over the world. So on that note, I have to help someone move a couch soon. So I want to get to my final segment. There's questions here I had written down. I'll have to have you back on because they would be 20-minute segments each. I'm sure of it. But anyway, I want to do my due diligence, and I've started a playlist called A Collective Musical Mind, a Spotify playlist, and I'm having each guest give me an EP or a song that recently has like really inspired you or just hit you in the feels, whatever it may be. It doesn't need to be a new thing at all, um, but it needs to be something that recently has impacted you. And I'll throw it in the playlist. And yeah,
Okay, cool. I will. I'll have a think.
yeah, yeah. Take your
There are a
time.
few. Yeah, there are a few that come to mind, but yeah.
Can you give me one right now?
Yeah, no, no. Let me go away because I've got a couple of candidates. So I want to, because you've asked for one, I want to choose wisely.
Sure. So after Mark slept on it for a couple nights, he wound up getting back to me with actually two songs. The first is "Numb" by Portishead. I know Mark to be a big fan of trip hop. It's a genre we often talk about making a sample pack, just like a trip hop based sample pack, and Portishead's kind of the drums in particular, kind of like the holy grail of that genre. So got to have that one on there, and then the other one is called "Bond" by Doris Berg and Sebastian Mullert. I don't know how to say that. Not Malort. This is Mullaert, from the record That Who Remembers. And that track is hot. It's 6 minutes and 19 seconds of just some super cool, kind of like uh, laid back dance music. It does not get very aggressive at any point. It's pretty chill throughout, and I really enjoyed that one. So I'm gonna have to check out the rest of that record. All right, to the show close. All right, Mark. Well, thank you for being here. You've seen a lot of things happen and been involved in a lot of them, and so it's been great to hear your perspective on it all. So thanks for being here.
Been wonderful. Been great. Thanks, Rick.
Hey everyone, thanks for listening to that episode with Mark Nell. Hope you learned something cool. I did. I know it was pretty sweet to have Mark on considering all my guests prior to him have been within, I don't know, maybe 3 years of my age. So it's nice to have a seasoned vet on who has a different perspective on life and history and everything related to sample packs. So, if it wasn't already clear, I have made 3 sample packs with 5-pin media. You've been hearing the ads if you've been a regular listener of the show, and if you go to the show notes, you can check those out. I have them all listed there. 1 is psychedelic soul and down tempo, 2 is laid back and groovy, and 3 is laid back and groovy guitars. They're all available on loopmasters.com. That's where those links will take you. Check them out if you are in need of loops, or if you know someone who is and that's kind of their jam. Maybe you point them in that direction. We've talked about doing a breakbeat pack coming up. You'll be hearing more about that as it coagulates and comes together. Thanks for being here. If you want to find Mark, you can visit 5pinmedia.com, and also at Loopmasters. If you just search 5pin, you'll find all of their stuff. I've used a variety of these packs that Mark has just been kind enough to give me over the years. Um, Most of them are kind of like house and techno based, but it is awesome to use some of those loops and one shots and just kind of apply them as textures in my recordings or just shakers. And I used all kinds of 5-pin stuff all over my record Glimmers, which you should check out right now if you haven't already. There's so much stuff in those things. They're all done super well. Mark has great attention to detail. So anything with the 5-pin name on it, he's going to be the last one touching it. And he's going to make sure it's got that seal of approval and that quality seal that people have come to know and love from 5-pin media. So once again, thanks for listening. Thanks for being here. And go do something that makes you uncomfortable today. Thanks for listening to A Musical Mind. I have been your host, Richard Raymond II. If you, your band, or your friend, or anyone you know is in need of mixing and mastering services, I offer that remotely. Shoot me an email. That's richardraymond2@gmail.com. No spaces, all spelled out. You can also give me a follow, Richard_Raymond_II on Instagram. Shoot me a DM. We'll get to making some cool shit. And please like this podcast, share it with a friend, give it a 5-star rating. It ain't too hard to do. I appreciate you for being here, and I'll see you next time.